Welcome back to the Wrestling with Words podcast. My name is Cameron. I'm a writer, an editor, and your host. Here, we talk about all things related to writing and storytelling. And the goal is to help you tell better stories while also understanding how the best stories are told. Today, we're going to talk about the 3 basic character arcs. But even saying the 3 basic character arcs is a tad bit misleading. And you'll see why in a little bit. There's a couple of terms I'm going to be using that don't necessarily mean that I'm making a value judgment, but they're more of literary devices that we use when we're creating a character arc or when we're talking in the context of a character arc. A couple of those are the character lie and the character truth. We also have the character wants, which is sometimes also the lie or can be considered the lie. And we also have the character needs, which is the truth that the character needs. I'll also probably use good and bad throughout, but this doesn't necessarily mean that these are morally good or morally bad or any sort of value judgment on certain aspects of the story. They're more so in reference to, again, the character's wants and needs. The good things are the things that make our character change for the better, and the bad things are the things that might make our character change for the worse or keep them the way that they are. This is, of course, in the context of the needs, whereas in the wants, the bad things are typically the things that are preventing our character from changing, where the good things are the things that are helping them change and progress in their arc. It's kind of tricky to understand good, bad, better, worse. Sometimes you get a good lie that makes your character's life better in the world that they're in. This lie can be both a good need or it could be a bad want, depending on the arc and the message of your story. And the same goes for a bad truth. Depending on the arc of your story and the overall message of your narrative, the realization of these truths could fall into a positive arc or a negative arc. Good and bad truth and lie are terms that we use that are only really in the context of our characters and not necessarily a value judgment on those things in the context of social and cultural norms. That's a lot of front loading with terms and good and bad and moral and stuff. We kind of want to talk about character arcs and basic character structures that we have. And also generally, I'm going to be going through these arcs and using the term character protagonist because I'm mostly framing it in terms of the main character or the main protagonist's arc. But of course, sub-characters, minor characters, antagonists, everybody can have an arc if they want it. But usually we want to tie the protagonist's arc to the general structure of the story. This will help with pacing and giving thematic payoffs. The 3 basic arcs that then become a few more arcs are our positive arcs, our negative arcs, and our flat arcs. But even within those, there are 2 different positive arcs, with a flat arc kind of being a positive arc, and we have 3 negative arcs, with flat arcs sometimes also being a negative arc. But the 2 heroic or positive arcs that we have are a positive arc and a flat arc. And then the 3 negative arcs that we have are the disillusionment arc, the fall arc, and the corruption arc. We'll talk a bit about each of those once we get to it. And in case you're wondering, I'm using a few resources to talk about character arcs. Mostly I'm using K.M. Wilden's book, Creating Character Arcs, as well as her blog and podcast. Both of those are tremendous resources. I'm also using John S. Warner's The Secret to Creating Character Arcs, as well as the ReadZ blog. I'll leave all of those linked below in case you wanted to check them out for yourself. And one last disclaimer before we jump into sort of analyzing these character arcs. We're going to talk a lot about structure and the actual plotting of your story. But as it goes without saying, you don't necessarily need to fully plot out your story. You don't necessarily need to hit all of these beats or anything like that. Generally, a good rule of thumb to try and consider it, as it, again, will help with pacing and will help with the overall thematic structure of your story, but it is not required. So, the positive arc. Generally, this is going to be a positive transformation that our character is going to go through. So they are going to be given or start with their want, which is usually in the form of a lie that they believe about the world, and will eventually change and achieve their needs or realize what their needs are and then achieve them. This is then the truth that they will acquire. Usually we'll start with a negative belief about the world or a negative lie about the world, and then changing over time to have a positive belief, or at least having their belief changed for the good, and this being a good thing that the character needs. Generally, we will start with the lie and the character believing in their wants and not knowing or rejecting even their needs. We should ask ourselves, what does our character believe is true? And within the first act or even the first quarter of your story, your character should start to get the inclination that this lie that they believe is not true, leading them to question it and even challenge it. As we progress, our main character will likely be punished or face some sort of setback due to this lie. This will likely be the first pinch point, roughly, but also during the second act / middle portion of your story, the character will likely see truth, but does not yet fully reject the lie that they once believed. Towards the end of your story, the character will start to reject this lie and embrace this new truth that will then lead them to gaining and even realizing what they want is not what they need. Following this realization, the character gains the need and emerges enlightened and changed for the good. Usually we see some common traits in the positive arc, and those being happy endings, or at least endings that are happier on the scale, a little bit sweeter. Usually this leads to lessons learned or even has a very central thematic message that the writer or the story is calling for. There will usually be a feeling of enlightenment or very distinct change happening at some point towards the latter half of the story. And the 3-act structure is very common to be used for a positive arc. Also, usually the lie is a morally or socially bad thing, where the truth is a morally or socially good thing. Next, let's go into the negative arcs. It's hard to talk as globally about negative arcs because there is a lot of variation between them that makes them each sort of stand out and are unique on their own. No one negative arc is kind of the same, although we can probably picture what a negative arc looks like in our head. For starters, the one that people are probably most familiar with, or the one that most people can understand best, is the corruption arc. Here, the character knows or sees the truth, rejects this truth, and then embraces their lie. Essentially, this is the inverse of the positive arc, or at least it hits the same beats, but instead of the lie being shed and the truth being revealed, it's instead the truth being shed and the lie being revealed and embraced. However, one of my particular favorites to write amongst the negative arcs is the disillusionment arc. Here, the character believes in their lie, overcomes this lie, only to find that the truth is tragic. And sometimes the truth can be worse than whatever the lie is that they believed. This is, of course, drastically different from the corruption arc and changes the overall feel of the arc as a whole. Not just the ending, but also all the steps kind of in between. And finally, of the 3 negative arcs, and the one that I think is equally as interesting, is the fall arc. Although this one is probably the most tragic and also the most destructive. Here, our character fully believes in the lie. They cling to the lie, and when faced with the truth, rejects it only to believe a worse lie. This one is by far the most destructive. We can kind of see why. With the disillusionment arc, it's almost flat. We start with a lie, are given the truth, but then find that the truth is still bad or tragic. There's almost this sort of flat feeling to it. Whereas with the fall arc, we start with the lie, we are given the truth, and then we believe a worse lie. So we end up worse or believing something worse. In broad terms, with a negative arc, we are starting with some sort of positive or good belief. Sometimes this can be an optimistic view on a certain social or cultural norm, but then end up embracing something that is negative or something worse. The one that I always like to use is true love. Say our character believes in true love, but they go through a series of things in the story, and then they end up not believing in love. Similarly, we can have a character going through a positive arc where they don't believe in love, but through a series of events, at the end of the story, they end up believing in love and finding love. But some common traits for negative arcs are usually tragic endings, even bittersweet endings, or just bitter endings in general. We see a lot of negative arcs act as almost like origin stories for antagonists or even some side characters. And this might be a longer arc played over the course of a series or spanning multiple books, movies, or installments. But similar to positive arcs, there's usually an underlying message or some sort of message that is relayed or said about whatever the lie or whatever the truth is. Sometimes this is much more subtle in the ending, but if you look at it as a whole, it becomes very clear what a story is about. Whereas with positive arcs, usually the message is almost explicitly stated at the end. Usually too, with negative arcs, there's a either cynical take on something or even a harsh message or a harsh truth that is being relayed to the audience. And again, when I'm talking about all of these common traits, these are just common traits. These aren't laws that dictate or that each of these arcs are going to have to stand up to. But with the last type of arc, which is our neutral arc or our flat arc, this one is actually the second most common, next to the positive arc, which I find kind of interesting. And I know at the start I said that a neutral arc or a flat arc is really a positive arc, but I think there's also room to be a negative flat arc as well. Sometimes the flat arc or the neutral arc is called the testing arc, and this is in relation to testing a truth or a belief that a character might have, challenging it, picking it apart, and then having them have that belief be reinforced. This is usually the form of our positive flat arc. But with our positive flat arc, a character starts out in a world where the lie is globally accepted, but they know or believe the truth. And usually through the course of the story, they end up revealing this truth to the rest of the world or continuing to believe this truth. And when it comes to the negative flat arc, this is one that is less common. Typically, when we are talking about a negative flat arc, we are dealing with a character that is either inhabiting a world possessed by the lie or the truth. But this usually doesn't matter as much, because what matters is that the character knows a lie or knows a bad truth about themselves, and over the course of the story do not change or continue to embrace this lie or bad truth. On the surface, sometimes a negative flat arc can look like any other negative arc, but the difference here is that the same lie that is believed at the start, or the same negative truth that is believed at the start, is still believed at the end of the story. Though what might have happened is that that lie might have spread to other characters, or they might have just have a better understanding of that lie or bad truth. A short story I wrote as well is one that involves a flat arc. Static Love, which is available down below for free, is a story where our protagonist knows a truth about themselves and does not change. In that story, they probably fall in the realm of either a negative flat arc or just a regular flat arc. The truth that they know about themselves is not what they need, but actually just a want. And the enlightenment that they have at the end is just a better sense of this want. But that's all to say, these are sort of the 3 that then becomes 5 and sometimes 6 basic character arcs. Character arcs are a lot of fun to consider and talk about, and I'm sure I'll talk about more of them and maybe even each of these in the future. But let me know what you're wrestling with. Are you writing or using any sort of character arcs for your current story? Have you used any in the past? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, and thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.